Welcome to Unhinged Magi. We're back. We're here for a part 2 of the FaB 2.0.
Yeah, there's gonna be a few of these videos, FaB 2.0 videos. We might even want to release them like day after, or like maybe a bunch of them even the same day. I don't know.
Maybe.
But the point is,
it was a lot of information.
Yeah.
We wanted to break it up so we don't drone on monotonously.
So we want you guys to actually watch this content, not click off an hour-long video.
Exactly.
And
like
maybe,
some people.
Maybe even pick the topics that you want to hear spoken about the most.
Exactly.
So in this topic, we want to touch on kind of two main things. I don't know whichever order you want to go in. One of the topics is, was Everfest like overprinted based on, and what does it even mean, overprinting?
Yeah. And
then also that newer set that's kind of like the Chronicle set with the white border cards, whatever they're going to call it.
Historical.
Yeah.
Display.
So yeah, we're going to talk about those two topics. So I don't know which one you want to touch on first.
Let's go ahead and talk about the white border historical front first.
Okay, sure, no problem.
Okay.
Go for it.
All right, so they're printing all the 3 sets and merging them down into one box. There's not going to be any cold foils. There's not going to be any kind of... there are going to be fables, but they're not going to be foiled out. There's no rainbows. There's no cold. There's nothing like that. Nothing like fancy dancy. And it's going to be in white border. It's kind of like, it's supposed to be a cheaper version for light players. And from what James has actually informed the viewers, it's really just so you can put that in stores that need it, so people can actually play the game and have a cheap version that they can purchase and not really think about it. Right? Yep. And that way they have cards in hand and they can try it and experience the gameplay of Flesh and Blood. Because it is a great game. Regardless of which kind of quality cards you have, you don't need a cold foil to enjoy the game.
Correct.
You don't need rainbow foil to enjoy the game.
Correct.
You need cards, though. That's one of the most important things. And from a certain point of view, white border currently is not needed, but from James's point...
Based on a supply perspective.
But based on James's perspective, a distributor needs to be able to send it to an LGS. And currently, I don't think he says that.
Well, yeah, a lot of these other ones are out of print, effectively.
Exactly. So that's why that's going to somehow fill this void.
Yeah, so we're not exactly sure that void needed to be filled when there's still boxes in the market. Even if they're not actively printing it, there's boxes in the market for $60 each.
Right.
Which is pretty cheap, honestly. That's makes it a lot easier to get. And we also now know from the discussion between James and Rudy that these white border cards you're looking at are like less appealing to the eye intentionally. Because James actually, as a design goal, wants his own words. He said it himself, that he wants the most desirable versions to come out first, and then the reprintings to be less desirable, kind of looking as time goes on. That's an actual intention of his, and you see that manifesting here in these white border cards.
I'm just glad he didn't make it like a revise and all faded out.
Now I know that there's a lot of discussion about how this stuff goes overseas, like not in U.S. markets. Of which Dan and I, we don't have a lot of good or knowledgeable things to say because we don't understand the overseas markets.
Correct. We don't know what their distributors and levels is, or why it can't get over there, or why there's a low supply over there.
Yeah, we really don't understand it. So when we're giving our comments, we're really talking about U.S. markets. And in U.S. markets, I don't think these cards are needed.
Correct.
They're being printed into a space where there's already an issue getting the existing cards in the market sold. So I think that's not necessarily great for U.S. markets.
Correct, yeah.
But overseas markets, I hear some people even in... Gosh, what was I hearing? In Venezuela and other places like Brazil, they were really celebrating that these cards were coming out because now they can get access to them. So,
but on top of that, they're going to be actually printed in black border in foreign currencies,
foreign languages, kind of like the foreign black border revised and stuff like that in Magic.
Exactly, but that's actually a good thing.
Yeah,
so now it's actually in their language, and that's actually easier playable. And I actually do think that's actually a good idea.
Yeah.
He said it's actually going to be limited. I was thinking that they should probably upscale that as not being limited, Yeah. But, whatever. So as long as it actually is white border as well printed in their language, I think that's even better. Right?
Yep.
Because then it spreads it a lot faster.
Yeah, so this has a lot of positives to it. Definitely from the perspective of overseas, other countries that didn't have access to those earlier boxes that weren't distributed there. That's a definite positive. And also, I do like how he's keeping the original printings as more valuable, as more sought after. That's at least his intention with it. I do like that, actually. And so, like, they actually get props with that.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, so yeah, good job, LSS, on that one as well. The supply is, and this seems to be LSS's constant miss, is the supply-demand equation.
Right.
And maybe, like, just let me touch on this real quick, because I know the question comes up. People ask me sometimes, even in the comments, what does it mean to be oversupplied? How do you define oversupplied? So let me be very explicit about that. If I try to say that us over or undersupplied was based on Edwin's opinion, that'd be a terrible metric, because I'm just one dude and I can be wrong.
But what if he's smart?
Even if I'm smart, doesn't matter. Like, it's one person's opinion. What you don't want is as a subjective opinion. You want an objective opinion. You want something that is outside or objective kind of definition. Sorry, not opinion. You want something that's objective. It's clear. You can prove it many different ways. It doesn't depend on one certain person. It's a good metric, right? And so the best metric, the best way to look at over or undersupplied is you have to look at, big surprise, supply and demand. And a really good
Basic economics.
Yeah, a really good way that describes this even in Magic's terms. Think for a second about revised dual lands. When revised dual lands first came out, they were not rare. They were not that heavily sought after. For a lot of years, revised dual lands were just like $10 each, maybe up to $20 each at some point.
And that's relative to the player base, because it wasn't, that level was player base acquisition. It wasn't collector base.
Yeah, people, people that were there, I know you were there, would experience it. People would trade like several dual lands for a Shivan Dragon or something like that.
Yeah.
They weren't that rare. When they came out, dual lands to some extent were oversupplied because revised was a huge print set. Now, today, revised dual lands are very rare. And you know that they're rare because their price is high. But the supply of revised dual lands never changed.
Correct.
What changed was the demand, because so many more Magic players now exist that the ratio between supply and demand swung the other way. And now at nearly 300,000 of each dual land printed, a revised dual land is actually rare, even at that kind of printing level.
Well, they got like, what, 7 million players or something like that, or nonsense?
Oh, I heard like 20 to 40 million for Magic.
Okay. Yeah.
So anyways, the concept to be super clear on is when we say over or undersupplied, we're talking about there's a supply-demand ratio, and when the supply is larger than the demand, the price drops. That is the reason that we were able to, a year ago, look at Flesh and Blood and say it's oversupplied, because we saw the market just falling down effectively.
Right? Someone's going to under the sword of Damocles. Basically.
Yep. Yeah, it wasn't Edwin's opinion. It was an objective opinion based on what you see in the market. And I want to be clear about that.
So now we have another white border edition. And so if you don't think about what James actually said, then it looks like there's going to be even more abundance of cards in boxes that potentially won't move. And that's kind of like a thing in business where you print too much of the same thing over and over again. You're not supposed to do that.
Right.
Because then your money's not flowing. It's just sitting in a box.
Yep.
And you don't want to do that. You want to sell boxes.
Yeah. So on the term of selling boxes, there's a question at hand is Everfest overprinted or underprinted? Is it oversupplied or not? There's a question going around. And actually, there's a perspective that we want to give you guys that we think
is very important too.
Yeah.
And it's based on how many people play the game of Flesh and Blood versus how many boxes of Everfest or the value of current boxes there are.
Yeah, so notice that it doesn't say how many Everfest boxes are out. It just says TBA. Now, we're sticking with Everfest because Everfest has no unlimited printing. It only has first edition. And we have some trend line to look at. We have 16 and a half, 16 and a half, 37 and a half, and then 125. So people are guessing.
We know Monarch. We know how many Monarch has.
Yeah, there's a lot of guesses that at least Tales of Aria is probably 150k first edition.
But we can't really use that because it also has the unlimited. We can't use that as a
yeah, but I'm just talking first edition though.
Gotcha.
So Tales of Aria first edition is very likely 150k or more, which means Everfest is very likely around 170k or more. But you know, nobody knows for sure yet.
Nobody knows.
But that's a guess. Okay, now here's the reason why that's important. There's articles out there saying, based on James White himself making this statement,
based on James
that
White,
there's 200,000 Flesh and Blood players around the world.
This was actually printed in 2021 of June 24th. I think you can see that date right there. Yeah. Okay, so this is old data, and everybody keeps saying that the Flesh and Blood player base is still continuing to grow. So this number should actually be a lot larger now.
Yeah, it should be, according to what everyone keeps saying.
Right. Remember, Europe is actually booming. U.S. is kind of booming and flat, I guess. That's what I keep hearing. Yeah, it's not really moving here very much. Or it's really kicking high scream in Europe.
Well, I hear booming is what I was hearing. Really? Remember in Rudy's video, Rudy said that James told him that Europe might actually surpass the United States.
In LGSs, yes.
Oh, in LGSs.
I thought it was specific LGSs.
I thought he was saying it in the number of players. Okay, anyways, if we can't remember perfectly, anyways, let's not quote it.
That's fine.
But anyway, so there's 200,000.
Let's just go ahead and apologize now. We were wrong by that comment.
According to James White, 200,000 people playing Flesh and Blood as of the June 24th, 2021. And there he is. There's James White. He was the one that was actually saying it. Okay, now here's the thing.
Well, show him the quote.
Where's the quote?
It's up there.
It's up?
I think so. Up a little bit more. Stop. No, keep going. Stop. There it is. Right there.
Okay, they have inside of quotes here.
Right there.
Even in a global pandemic with a game designed to be played in the flesh and blood, we have about 200,000 players worldwide. We're in 26 countries at the moment, and our vision is to be the truly global game played by people of all backgrounds.
So now we're pretty much assured that we have 200,000 players based on what that was.
Based on what he said.
That's based on only that.
But here's the question. And here's how we want you guys to have this in your head. If you look at Everfest, which only has first edition, and Everfest in first edition, just say that number that everyone's kind of guessing at right now. Say 175,000 boxes. If you agree that there's only 200,000 players of Flesh and Blood in the world, but there's 175,000 boxes, those numbers don't really jive according with this chart.
Every single box should be sold by now.
Yeah, this chart shows Everfest being around $189 at pre-sale, and then release, it was much lower, and now the box price is still falling, and now it's below map. There's even some sales of boxes. I don't know there was shipping included, but the box prices were $65 here. The point is, you guys, I want you to think about the numbers and what those numbers actually mean, because that's where the rubber meets the road.
Yeah, it's extremely important to actually understand that. So this actually gives you, if the number is 175, all boxes should be gone.
Yeah, with 200,000 players. Isn't it a reasonable assumption? On average, each of those people would have bought one box.
Exactly. It's $77.
I mean, I bought 7 boxes myself and cracked them so I can get play cards.
I bought 14.
And then out of the 7 that what I cracked out of the 7, then I went on TCG Player and I bought everything else that I was missing except for just the Fabled. I'm just going to wait for that price to crash.
Yeah.
And then I'll buy a Fabled. So anyways, that's what I did. And so I'm 7 boxes in. You're 14 boxes in. I bet a lot of you out there open multiple boxes. So does it even make sense that out of 200,000 players worldwide, you couldn't get 1 box per person sold? In my mind, that doesn't make sense. There would be way more. Now, in addition, there's kind of 2 ways you can go with that. That either means that the print run of Everfest is a lot higher than 170. Yeah, maybe
500,000,
400,000, 500,000. Maybe it is.
Because if you look at Tales of Aria, if you pull up Tales of Aria, how much is a box going for? 90.
Tales of Aria.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll have to.
I mean, that has first and unlimited.
So I'll go back here.
Because Monarch's at 150 to 160. and that was 175, right? So if you go back to Tails is at 89. So supposedly its print run is lower than Everfest. So I would assume that Tales of Aria is double the print run of Monarch. And Monarch, and Everfest would be double the print run of this. And that would reflect the prices that we're currently seeing. But that's only opinionated.
That's really not that's really not a bad way of looking at it,
because
honestly.
Monarch is 150 to 160 usually.
Yeah, so if we were to assume that the player base is fairly constant and what you see in the market is a reflection of that supply and demand, and if Monarch is at 125,000 sitting at $150 a box, it would make sense if this was like twice or close to twice the supply of Monarch, the prices would do what they did. And you guys, I want to be clear, this isn't Dan and Edwin talking about our opinions on it so much. It's more about we're making a case that free market price discovery is a mechanism that's a real mechanism and can root out the reality of things. So this dropping of price here that you see on the screen, that actually is the market doing what the market does, finding what that real number of supply demand actually is.
Exactly. And that is pretty important. Now, it's good for players. They can go out and
Great for players.
Buy a first edition box at $89 or buy an Everfest box at $77.
Yep.
And there's nothing wrong with that. It just means that there is truly more of a print than players.
Yeah, you kind of one of two things. Either if James White's statement is correct, and there's 200 or more thousand players of Flesh and Blood around the world,
right,
then that means the print of Everfest is probably much bigger. 400,000 or 500,000 maybe. Or maybe James' statement was wrong, and I'm not calling him a liar. I'm just saying maybe he made a mistake. Yeah, maybe his data was bad, and maybe there is only like 40,000 players in Flesh and Blood, in which case that would actually explain quite well why Monarch fell off a cliff, why these other ones have fallen even harder off a cliff.
Yep.
Like just say for a second, say it was 40,000 players, and where does Edwin get this number from? That's a number that's getting passed around in communities based on the number of people that sign up for like official tournaments and such. It's like around 40,000. If that was the number of players in Flesh and Blood was like closer to 40,000, that would actually explain like 40,000 players compared to 16,000 WTR and Arcane boxes would explain their prices.
Yeah.
And then Crucible doubles that print. Right. And so then Crucible's price comes down. Then totally Monarch nearly goes 4x on that print.
And then it just tanks like a big giant dump.
Yep. And then these others going even higher, that would explain why their prices fell. So it would actually make sense if the player base was actually not at 200K, if it was somewhere closer to 40K, that would kind of explain this.
Yes.
Or you go the other way and you say that we think he's right, that the player base is 200,000, but then you got to look at the data and think, maybe that means Everfest is like 400,000 or 500,000.
Exactly.
First edition boxes.
So
printed.
It's either one or the other. There can't be like both. Right?
Yep.
So that's our take on it.
Yeah, we're effectively telling you to not let's be clear. We're not saying Edwin and Dan's opinion is it. What we're telling you is not to disregard the market data. That's what we're telling you to do.
Exactly. The market data is keen.
Yep. Yeah, and that's what we based our predictions on last time, which is exactly actually why we nailed it so hard on like what's actually going on.
Exactly.
So anyways, that's the video, guys. There's more coming.
There's more coming.
Yeah. I promise.
We got to give props to James. That article that he wrote was actually really well done.
Yeah, it actually really was. It was the most open I think I've ever seen.
Very honest, very blunt.
It was the most open I've ever seen a CEO of a company. And like, we haven't spoken enough about that positively yet. That's coming up in the next videos, I promise. Very, very good stuff, James, on that. Yeah. So we'll talk to you guys soon later.
Talk to you soon.